Emma had always liked quiet evenings. After long days at work, she found peace in her living room where the television hummed softly. That night, she brewed herself a cup of tea, pulled a blanket over her legs, and let an old black and white movie flicker across the screen. It wasn't so much about the film she had seen it a dozen times. It was more about filling the empty space around her. The house felt too big when the sun went down, and the silence often reminded her of everything she didn't have, just as the main character appeared on the screen. She heard footsteps. They weren't heavy, but steady, moving down the hallway. She turned her head and saw Daniel, her nephew, appear in the doorway. He wasn't the boy she remembered running around in sneakers anymore. At 25, he carried himself differently, with a calmness that surprised her every time she looked at him. He was home for a short visit after finishing another semester of graduate school, and his presence in the house had already changed the air. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice low, a little tired but warm. Emma smiled automatically. "Of course. Sit down." He crossed the room and dropped onto the couch beside her. The cushions dipped with his weight, and suddenly the room felt smaller, more alive. He leaned back, stretched his long legs, and glanced at the screen. "This old movie again," he teased, a faint grin touching his lips. "It's a classic," Emma said, lifting her mug. "Don't pretend you don't like it." Daniel chuckled, his laugh light and easy. It had been years since she had heard it in person, and it stirred something in her. She tried not to think too much about it, focusing instead on the film. Yet her attention kept drifting. The truth was, Emma had raised Daniel in many ways when he was younger. After his parents divorced, he had spent countless summers with her, leaning on her steady presence. She remembered helping him with homework, taking him to baseball games, making him pancakes on sleepy mornings. But tonight, sitting beside him, she realized time had reshaped him. He wasn't that boy anymore. He asked about her day, and she answered simply, but the way he listened struck her. His eyes were attentive, his tone thoughtful. She wasn't used to someone paying that much attention. It made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. The movie played on, but their conversation grew louder than the sound on the screen. He told her about his writing, the stories he wanted to finish, the city that felt overwhelming at times. She found herself drawn in, hanging on to his words. There was a depth in him now, quiet strength that surprised her. Emma laughed at something he said, and when she did, she caught his eyes lingering on her. For a second, it was as if the years between them blurred. She shifted her gaze quickly back to the television, heart unsteady. It was nothing, she told herself. Just a moment. Just family. Still, her pulse betrayed her calm expression. Daniel stretched his arms behind his head, relaxed, comfortable in her space. It should have felt ordinary, but instead the air grew thick, charged with something unspoken. Emma took another sip of tea to steady her hands. The night went on. Their conversation drifted into lighter things, childhood memories, old neighbors, funny moments from the past. Every time Daniel laughed, Emma felt it echo inside her. Every time their eyes met, she felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. By the time the movie ended, Emma realized she hadn't been watching the screen at all. She had been watching him, watching the way his smile tilted, the way his voice carried warmth, the way he looked at her like she wasn't invisible. When the credits rolled, Daniel leaned back and let out a breath. "That was better than I remembered," he said. Emma nodded, but she couldn't find her words. Something had shifted in the room. Something small, but undeniable. The house no longer felt empty. The silence she had carried for years was gone, replaced by a quiet tension she couldn't explain. And though nothing outwardly changed, no grand confession, no sudden action, Amon knew this night was different. This was the night she would remember, the moment she would return to in her thoughts. Because as Daniel sat beside her, laughing, speaking, simply being there, she felt something awaken inside her that she hadn't felt in a very long time. She didn't dare name it. She didn't even fully understand it. But it was there, and it was real. And as she turned off the television and the room slipped into darkness, she knew that whatever had shifted between them, it would not be so easily forgotten. The next evening came quickly. Emma expected another quiet night, but Daniel joined her again without asking. He carried 2 mugs of cocoa this time, placing one in front of her with an easy smile. "Thought you might like this more than tea," he said. She laughed softly, touched by the gesture. It was small, but it made her chest warm. The movie started, but almost at once their conversation took over. The television faded into background noise as they leaned toward each other, caught in stories that stretched further than either expected. Daniel spoke about graduate school, the endless papers, the professors who pushed him harder than he thought possible, the nights he doubted himself. Emma listened closely, nodding at his honesty, admiring his courage. He told her he wanted to write not just academic work, but stories. Things that matter, he said. Stories that make people feel less alone. His words carried conviction, and Emma felt something stir inside her. She hadn't heard anyone speak with that kind of passion in years. She shared her own thoughts, 2 quiet things she rarely told anyone. She admitted that sometimes the silence of her home weighed on her. She confessed how she wondered if life had passed her by while she was busy holding things together for everyone else. Daniel didn't judge. He didn't brush her words aside. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice steady. "You've never been invisible, Emma. Not to me." Her heart skipped. It was such a simple sentence, but it landed deep. She quickly looked at the screen, trying to ground herself. But her mind kept replaying those words. The night grew softer as they continued talking. She noticed details she had overlooked before, the way he paused before answering, as if every word mattered, the way his eyes carried a seriousness that made her feel understood. He wasn't the boy she had once guided. He was a man, one with depth, with dreams, with a presence that filled the room. At one point, their eyes met and held. Neither spoke. Neither looked away. Emma's breath caught, and she forced herself to shift her gaze. She told herself it was nothing, just closeness, just family, just a long conversation. Yet her pulse raced like she had crossed into dangerous territory. Daniel broke the silence first, his voice light. "Do you remember when you used to read to me before bed? You always made the characters sound alive." Emma smiled, grateful for the safer memory. "You begged for the same story every night. I nearly memorized it." They both laughed. But underneath the laughter was something heavier, something they weren't saying. Emma could feel it pressing between them, growing with every shared glance. Later, as the cocoa cooled, untouched on the table, Daniel shifted closer. He didn't seem to notice what his nearness did to her. Or maybe he did and chose not to speak it. His arm brushed hers as he leaned forward to adjust the volume. It was an innocent movement, but the contact lingered in her mind, sparking warmth she couldn't dismiss. The conversation slowed, but the silence wasn't empty. It was thick with unspoken thoughts, with emotions neither could give voice to. Emma folded her hands in her lap, willing herself to stay calm. She reminded herself of the years between them, the memories of family, the reasons this feeling couldn't exist. But the more she reminded herself, the more impossible it became to ignore. Daniel's gaze lingered on her again, softer this time, almost searching. She avoided it, pretending to focus on the television. But inside, she knew something had shifted permanently. The closeness between them wasn't the same as before. It wasn't just comfort. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was something deeper, something neither of them dared to define. When the night ended, Daniel stood and stretched, his voice casual. "I'll see you in the morning." But his eyes betrayed him. They carried a weight that mirrored her own. Emma nodded, smiling faintly. "Good night." As he left the room, the silence rushed back, but it wasn't the same silence she had lived with for years. This silence was alive, heavy with the memory of their shared words, their laughter, their long stares. Emma sat there long after he went to bed, staring at the darkened television screen. She could still feel the warmth of his arm brushing hers, still hear his voice telling her she wasn't invisible. It was such a small thing. A single evening of conversation, but she knew her heart would not return to what it was before. Something inside her had cracked open. Something tender and unspoken had begun to grow. She didn't know where it would lead. okay? And perhaps it would lead nowhere at all. But she knew this. Daniel was no longer just the boy she had once cared for. He was a man now. And she could not deny the shift she felt when she looked at him, and as she turned off the lamp and sat alone in the dark. Emma realized that unspoken moments could be the loudest of all. The morning light filled the kitchen with a soft glow. Emma moved quietly, pouring coffee into her mug, trying to steady her thoughts. She had barely slept. Her mind had replayed every word from the night before, every glance, every pause. She told herself it was silly, that she was overthinking. But the truth lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. Daniel walked in, his hair still messy from sleep, his expression calm. "Morning," he said, his voice warm, casual, as if nothing was unusual. But when his eyes met hers, something flickered there. Emma noticed it instantly, and it made her chest tighten. They ate breakfast together, the clink of silverware filling the silence. Normally, mornings with him felt easy. But today, the silence was heavier. She kept finding herself stealing glances at him, and every time she did, just saw a man who had grown into his own, not the boy she once knew. That thought unsettled her, and yet it drew her closer. After breakfast, Daniel offered to help with the dishes. He stood beside her at the sink, drying while she washed. Their shoulders brushed once, then again until finally his hand accidentally touched hers. It was nothing a slip, a natural accident, but neither of them pulled away immediately. For a breath, the air froze. Emma felt her pulse quicken, and when their eyes met, she saw the same stillness in him. He broke it with a small smile, almost shy, and quickly returned to drying. She forced herself to continue washing, though her hands trembled slightly under the water. The rest of the day unfolded slowly. They went about ordinary things, reading, stepping outside for fresh air, sharing small conversations, but underneath it all was the same tension. Emma could feel it with every word, every laugh, every silence that stretched a little too long. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly. It was magnetic, pulling her thoughts where she didn't want them to go. In the afternoon, Emma found herself watching him from the doorway as he scribbled notes in a journal. His brow furrowed in concentration, his hand moving quickly across the page. She remembered when he was younger, sitting at her kitchen table with crayons, drawing pictures he proudly showed her. Now he was a man with ideas and dreams, and she was struck by the distance between then and now. That distance frightened her, but it also made her heart ache with something she couldn't name. When he noticed her watching, he looked up and smiled softly. "You've always been the person who believed in me, Emma. I don't think I ever told you that." The words landed with unexpected weight. She tried to smile back, but her throat felt tight. She wanted to tell him how much that meant, how much he meant, but she couldn't find the courage. Instead, she turned away, busying herself with something trivial. Hoping he didn't notice the way her hands shook, evening came, and once again they found themselves on the couch. The television was on, but neither cared about what played. They sat close, a blanket stretched across both of them this time, brought in casually by Daniel as if it were the most natural thing. The warmth of the fabric, the closeness of his presence, made her heart unsteady. For a long while, neither spoke. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Emma felt every second of it, the way her breath quickened, the way her thoughts spiraled. She wanted to break it, to say something light, something safe, but her voice failed her. And then, without meaning to, she looked at him. Daniel's eyes were already on her. Neither looked away. It wasn't bold, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, steady, full of unspoken words. Emma's chest tightened as if she were standing on a fragile edge. She wanted to retreat, to step back into safety, but she couldn't. Finally, she forced herself to look away. Her hands gripped the blanket, and she tried to steady her breathing. Inside, her thoughts raced. This isn't right. It's just the closeness. It's just loneliness playing tricks on me. But no matter how much she tried to dismiss it, she couldn't erase the truth. Something had changed. Daniel shifted slightly, as if he, too, felt the weight of the moment. He cleared his throat, trying to break the silence. "You know," he said softly, "being here feels different this time. Like, I don't want it to end too quickly. Emma's heart twisted. She wanted to answer, but she was afraid of what might slip out if she did. Instead, she gave him a faint smile and nodded. Her voice lost somewhere in the storm of her thoughts. When the night finally drew to a close, Daniel stood and wished her good night. His words were simple, but his eyes lingered on hers a beat too long. Emma watched him walk down the hall, her heart heavy with questions she couldn't ask. The house fell quiet again. But it wasn't the same quiet she used to know. This silence was alive, filled with echoes of touches, looks, and words that seemed small on the surface but meant far more underneath. Emma sat alone, staring into the dim glow of the television, her thoughts spiraling. She knew nothing had been spoken outright. Nothing had crossed a line, but the shift inside her was undeniable. She could feel it in every glance, every pause, every moment they shared. And as the night pressed in, she realized she was no longer afraid of the silence itself. What unsettled her now was what the silence revealed, the truth she could no longer ignore. Something had awakened, something fragile and complicated, and though unspoken, it was there between them. And Emma knew the weight of it would not leave her easily. That evening, Emma returned to her living room with a mix of anticipation and unease. The quiet that usually comforted her now felt different. She settled onto the couch, pulling the blanket around her shoulders, and tried to focus on the soft glow of the television. But she knew it was pointless. Her thoughts kept returning to Daniel, to the moments they had shared over the past 2 days. Daniel entered the room without knocking, carrying a mug of cocoa in each hand. He smiled, placing one in front of her. "Thought you'd like this?" he said casually, but his eyes lingered on her longer than usual. Emma's chest warmed at the simple gesture, and she realized how much she had come to expect his presence. The ordinary act of sharing a drink felt charged with meaning now. They sat side by side, the blanket draped over both their laps. The television played quietly, unnoticed, while conversation began to flow naturally. They spoke of small things at first, books they were reading, the weather, the weekend ahead, but underneath it all was a tension neither could ignore. Emma noticed every detail: the curve of his smile, the way his hand rested near hers on the couch, the subtle shifts in his posture that suggested he, too, felt the closeness. At one point, Daniel reached out to adjust the blanket, and their hands brushed. It was fleeting, accidental maybe, but Emma felt a jolt run through her. She looked at him, but he was focused on the mug in his hands. Her mind raced. She told herself it was nothing. Just a touch. Just warmth. But her heartbeat betrayed her calm expression. Conversation slowed as the night deepened. The room felt smaller, more intimate, as if the house itself had leaned in to listen. Emma found herself watching him closely, noticing how much he had grown, not just physically, but in the quiet confidence of his presence. He was thoughtful, kind, and attentive in a way that drew her in, making it impossible to ignore the subtle pull she felt toward him. Daniel spoke softly about his plans after graduation, his dreams of traveling, writing, and finding a place where he could belong. Emma listened, drawn to the sincerity in his voice. She realized that she had spent years in routine, in comfort. And yet it was moments like this that reminded her how alive emotions could feel. Her chest tightened at the realization that their connection was no longer just familial. For a long moment, they fell silent, sitting close, feeling the warmth of the blanket and each other's presence. Emma felt a mixture of fear and longing, knowing that the shift between them was undeniable. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was subtle, gentle, and completely consuming in its quiet intensity. She wondered how much of it he felt. How much he noticed the tension that hummed in the air. Daniel broke the silence first, his voice low but steady. "I don't want this visit to end so soon," he said. There was no pressure in his words, only honesty. Emma's heart skipped. She wanted to reply, to reassure him, to acknowledge the feelings she couldn't yet name. But she remained silent, letting the moment linger. They moved naturally, sharing stories, laughter, and glances that stretched a heartbeat too long. Each moment added weight to the unspoken understanding growing between them. It wasn't love yet, not fully, but it was something equally profound. A quiet, magnetic connection that neither could ignore. A delicate bridge between familiarity and desire. The night grew late, and the room darkened as the television flickered softly. Daniel finally stood to leave, stretching casually, his eyes still on hers. "Good night, Emma," he said, but the words carried a weight that went beyond polite farewell. His gaze held her attention for a moment longer than necessary, and Emma felt a strange ache in her chest, a mixture of longing and hesitation. She watched him walk down the hall, listening to the soft click of the door behind him. The house fell silent again, but the silence was different from before. It was not empty. It was filled with the echoes of their conversation, their laughter, the brushed hands, and the lingering glances that refused to be forgotten. Emma sank back into the couch, pulling the blanket tightly around her. Her thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what had shifted. She knew life would continue, that tomorrow might be normal again. And yet she also knew that something inside her had changed permanently. The connection with Daniel was no longer just familial. It had taken on a weight, a depth that was tender, delicate, and undeniably real. She realized that their relationship had evolved in a way she had not anticipated. It was subtle, quiet, and restrained, but the impact was profound. She had always loved Daniel as a nephew, as family, but now there was an awareness, a heightened sensitivity to his presence that she could not ignore. It was not reckless or sudden. It was slow, careful, and charged with emotion. As the night deepened and the house grew still, Emma understood that she would carry this shift with her, whether she could articulate it or not. The change was small, almost imperceptible, but it mattered. Something new had begun between them, a bond that blurred the familiar lines, a connection that was intimate, profound, and full of possibility. And though nothing had been spoken aloud, Emma knew it. The moments they had shared, the touches, the laughter, the silent glances, all had shifted something inside her. Something had awakened, delicate and fragile, but real. And she understood in that quiet, still room that life would never feel quite the same again.